two.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Professor David Loertscher from the School of Information in San Jose State University in California. And today I am thrilled to introduce all of you to Morgan Keohane, Morgan, introduce yourself and tell us about the school that you're the librarian at.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Keohane, and I am the librarian at the P.A. Shaw Elementary School. We are in Dorchester, Massachusetts. We are a Boston public school, so we are part of the city of Boston's public school system. And I work with students in grades K0. So that would be 3 and 4-year-olds that have substantially separate needs, all the way up to 4th graders. So we're definitely early elementary, which I love. And I have been at the PA Shaw. This is my 9th year here. So I have been here since the school opened in 2014.
Oh, great. So describe the young people that come to your school.
Yes. So when our students enter the school building, I would say the area that I teach in, there are varying socioeconomic needs, and we have a very large immigrant population that we serve. So about 98% of our students are students of color, 60% of that being students of African-American descent, who are African-American. And yeah, we have a lot of English language learners. So our biggest languages being Spanish and Haitian Creole. We also have a lot of families that speak Portuguese, Somali. So when my students are coming to school, a lot of times this is the first time that they have heard English. And it's really their first school experience because I'm working with young students. Many of my students don't necessarily have books at home. So a lot of times when they're coming to me, this is really their first exposure to handling of books, really getting to explore the library. And yeah.
So you've got a whole school of what I would say almost zeros, in what they don't know almost anything. So
yeah, I mean, I will say my students come in and they are so excited to learn and so excited about being in school, where all of the information that they're taking in is exciting and like engaging. So I think it's amazing. I love working here just because everything that we learn about or I'm exposing them to in the library is like, you can see the wheels spinning and like the curiosity going, imagination has been sparked. It's really fun for me to be able to just see like where they're starting to by the time they leave me in 4th grade. It's just incredible.
So how you've been at this 9 years. So how did you and the teachers come up with your strategies when you have this unique population of kids?
Yes. I would say that when I started here, the school was new. I have been here since year 1 when we opened, alongside all of the other classroom teachers that I was working with were also starting. And we all came in with a very similar vision in that we wanted a holistic approach for these students, in that we're not just concerned about their test scores or how they're doing on assessments, but we want them to be exposed to things and have resources that, quite frankly, across the country, students that look like my students aren't getting. And we wanted them to have a just fulfilling school experience, feeling safe here, feeling welcoming, when they come in the doors, all of that. So I think it was helpful that all of us as teachers and staff just had a very similar vision of what we wanted for our students. And then I also think it was helpful that because we were starting from scratch, we really got to pick and choose what we wanted our students to learn and focus on. So true collaboration happened from the beginning. I think we very much all relied on each other to sort of figure out what student needs were and how to go about that. So I will say collaboration has been something that I'm just so grateful for at my school. I haven't really had to force that with anyone.
So you're on a flexible schedule. So that means that you're most of your time is working with others, with classroom teachers, et cetera. Describe how that all works.
Yes. So I've done both types of scheduling where I have been on a responsive, flexible scheduling and on a fixed. And I will say being on a flexible schedule allows for that true collaboration and that true, in my opinion, like high quality guided inquiry based research to happen. So really for me, it's being provided that time to meet with teachers, and we're really closely combing through their curriculum together. So I'm very aware of all of the units that they're teaching in their classrooms. And then we're kind of going together and going, wow, this would be a great place to, start doing research, whether that be learning about the databases in the library. Is this accurate information? Is it not? We're able to really comb through that together. So for example, our first graders do an entire unit on endangered species. And then that's a great place for me to go to the classroom teacher. Awesome. Let's start doing some of this work in the library so it doesn't all have to happen up in the classroom. And I feel like I try to push also on top of the curriculum that teachers have. Let's give these students some agency. So yes, they're doing endangered species, but let's not tell them that they have to do polar bears, right? I think that can happen a lot. So I'm also trying to be there as a resource for the teachers to say, let's give them some choice. And that can happen in the library. I think choice and agency, like the library, is the perfect place for that.
So, but your kind of agenda is what? Reading, basic reading, inquiry, and technology that you're kind of pushing into what the classroom teachers topical have I got that right?
Yeah, and I would say not just basic reading, but I really try to have the students develop their own reading identity. So I want them thinking, not only do I want them to enjoy reading, but I want them to feel comfortable knowing it's okay to like a certain book, and it's okay to express when you don't like something. And how can you explain why you didn't like that book? That's okay. I want them to also just explore different genres, different types of books in the library, and just figure out what they even like, because that's not necessarily happening outside of the school building.
Right.
So I want them to feel comfortable, like expressing themselves and saying, yeah, I do love this. Yeah, I care about this, or I don't.
Right. But you're doing that in a multilingual, you've got what, 20 kids or so, but
Yes.
you've got multiple languages you're talking to. How do you build this communication between you and them?
Yeah. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work on my part to find resources that are in multiple languages. And my students are young. So honestly, also finding resources that are developmentally and age appropriate. There's a lot out there that is just too much for my students to process and almost turns them away from the research process, which I don't want to happen. So I really have to comb through what's out there and make sure they can access it, that they can listen to it in their own, their home language. Even if that might be, if we're doing, research in the library and they're taking down notes, I need to make sure they have the tools, for example, using Google's speech to text. So, if typing is too hard, then we're just talking and the notes are coming out for us.
Oh, wow.
So
Give us another example of a fun project you do, maybe with the older students.
Yeah. So we've done a couple. I will say one that I'm very passionate about, our third graders. We do a whole unit on learning about access to education. It used to be sort of broad. The curriculum had it where it was learning about access to education across the world. But the teachers and I took that and really honed in on access to education in the city of Boston in particular, and how not every student even has access to a library in Boston. So students read different texts, sort of understanding that not everybody gets to go to school and why that might happen. And then in the library, students came after doing research about different protests, different marches, advocacy efforts that have happened in Boston to sort of change that. My students all made public service announcements where they wrote the scripts, recorded themselves, and talked about how important it was to have access to libraries in their schools. They also did a project where they mapped out and placed little free libraries in our neighborhood, and then got the funding so that we actually filled those libraries.
Oh, wow.
They did that. And then they also made in the library, they did presentations and dioramas about different protests or marches in Boston, some pretty significant historical events where people have fought for access to education and access to libraries.
Is there a public library in your neighborhood?
There is. We are very lucky in that we have a public library that's about a 10-minute walk from our school. So we try to bring the kids there pretty regularly. In the winter, it can be tough. But spring, we're walking there, especially with the older kids. We try to go once a week.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, I mean, the fourth graders right now, we're doing a project where they're studying wolves and how wolves are portrayed in fiction, particularly in fairy tales. And then they're doing research to determine whether or not that's how wolves are actually in real life. So that's been pretty interesting to see them sort of understand, maybe there's a different side to this animal that we hadn't thought about, or why are they always portrayed as the, the antagonist in stories. So it's been interesting.
Tell us about, so you're starting kind of from ground zero, and what's happening to these kids after they've experienced you and going on into their future? What's your experience? Because you've been at it a while.
Yes. I will say I've tried to keep as much data as possible about what happens when our students move on to other schools, at least in the Boston public school system. And most of our students do really well after leaving here. I would like to say, I think because they have had exposure to the library and have developed some of those research skills. So a lot of our students go on to exam schools, which in Boston is almost like you have to test into certain high schools. It's a very interesting process, but needless to say, our students do really well on those assessments, even though we're not necessarily like an assessment focused school. I think because we've given them skills in the library to sort of evaluate information, look at different sources, they do really well on those. And then I've had some of the high school librarians in Boston reach out to me and say, it's very clear that we know who's coming from the Shaw, because just in terms of what they're even trying to ask in terms of questions in the library or what they want to do for projects, we're doing well in terms of their, their higher level thinking.
That's absolutely incredible. So it would be wonderful to have a dissertation done on the actual progress and follow these young'uns. And
I did do some action research on my some of my students who at the beginning of the year were well below grade level in terms of their reading levels. And we did some action research on does selection influence reading comprehension? And it was very clear that when students were given the choice of what they wanted to read, reading comprehension really improved, which sounds like so basic, but having that data to show was great. And many of those students did really well on our specifically assessment questions that were related to figuring out resources and nonfiction text. So they were able to use captions to, figure things out. They were able to use photographs as evidence in their responses, and other students weren't able to do that. So,
oh, wow.
It was really interesting and sort of showed like, yes, again, having that agency and that voice in the library results in students doing better in school, and I think having a better school experience.
That's absolutely incredible. So let's talk about one of the problems that elementary school librarians have is this balance between the fixed and flexible schedule. The fixed being you take students for a certain period of time, weekly or bi-weekly or whatever. Talk about how that impacts what the library can actually do and accomplish.
Yes. In my opinion, because I have done both, being on a fixed schedule really impacts the amount of collaboration that's happening with the classroom teachers. So when students are on a fixed schedule and they're coming to the library, as you said, certain set times, it doesn't really encourage that collaboration. It's almost like here you are, students are handed off.
Right.
Do what you need to do, but we're not really trying to make it fit with what's happening in the classroom. Because most often, being on a fixed schedule, that time that students are in the library is the time that classroom teachers have their lunch or have their planning period. Right. So they're not really concerned with what students are doing in the library because they have to worry about so many other things. So there isn't that need to really think about how can we make this work for students? How can we really leverage, what's happening in the classroom and expand upon it in the library? That's what I've found, at least. It just makes it harder for teachers and librarians to connect and collaborate.
So you've been at this long enough with your experience and with a very interesting population. Mm-hmm. Let's think about the bottom line. Let's think about equity and, the whole idea of can a school really transform kids that don't really have the experience level to start with, and yet they can succeed wildly. And talk about that to us. What's the bottom line?
I mean, to me, my students are incredible, right? It's not their fault that they have not been given the resources that, every school should have. I think I have to spend a lot of my own time finding grants or getting funding to get the resources that other schools are automatically given, and not saying that that's necessarily a cure, right? Sometimes schools have resources, but if you don't know how to use it, that's not going to be helpful to students. I just think that one, exposure, especially we have so many students of color that either have not been exposed to the resources that a library can offer, or I also like to incorporate a lot of different aspects of technology, engineering in the library. So I know that's also missing and lacking at many schools, particularly the ones serving students of color. So I think one, just giving them exposure and then allowing them to decide is this something I might be interested in, right? You're not going to know if you're interested in being an engineer or a computer programmer if you've never even heard about it. So I think one, just giving the exposure, and then two, trying to make sure my students know that you are absolutely entitled to, having the best of everything. You are absolutely deserving of that. And there should be no question about that. You are, intelligent beyond measure, and allow that to grow. And we're just I will say, as a whole school, trying to make sure our students know that, yes, we might not have everything in our building, but my students are more than capable, of doing incredible things. And I think, I have a lot of students who start, quite frankly, being embarrassed about speaking multiple languages. And I'm like, this is such a skill. It's incredible. Like, this is something that we need to build up. We need to, you should absolutely be comfortable and proud that you can speak multiple languages. We're trying to, just in life outside of the academics, right? Like, make sure that our students know that they are completely deserving and are capable of doing incredible things.
To sum it up from my perspective, you are in a school where almost all the children are very needy of you. But there's also these kind of students are in the minority in many schools across the nation, but deserve the same kind of attention and equity concerns that you have. You are absolutely world-class, Morgan. And so I want to thank you very much for a great conversation. And I hope that those who are viewing today will really take to heart what you said. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's all for the students. They're the reason that, we do what we do. They're the best.
That's right.